Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in existentialism in the novel by Reine entitled She Died, Then Showed Me. Today we're going to take a look at existential crisis. And existential crisis occurs just before a very important transition in life from the old self to the new self. It's chapter 14, and let's get started and look at block 1. Past motives are thrown into question by Peyton's new hope. The old self emerges again. Ashton shows up at Royce's party. Adler is also in attendance, and Ashton says that he is getting a divorce for Peyton. But Peyton declares it's too late for any return relationship. She is transitioning beyond that old self. It's too late for that return relationship of the old self. The step of negation to the old self. Adler arrives and Peyton declares to Ashton that she is with Adler. Peyton also confesses to Adler that, and here's key, this artificial environment is only a small and occasional part of her life. She's no longer feels comfortable in this artificial environment. It doesn't define who she essentially is. She's on a journey, the journey of the eschatological self. She's on a journey of writing her own last start. Remember, the painting was unfinished. It's her task to finish the last start. She's in the midst of writing that last start. And so she's negating this artificial environment. It does not define who she is. It may have been a part of her past life, but it no longer holds importance for her. It does not define her essential self. The synthesis of a new affirmation. Uncle Mark makes the comment that Adler has, in his opinion, personally affected Peyton. He sees it. Mark sees that Adler has actually personally affected Peyton. More importantly, Peyton begins to question herself, question her motivations, especially concerning this purely economic venture of this hunt, because she loves the purity of nature. She confesses that she loves the purity of nature. She confesses that she loves the purity of creation. And now she's organizing this hunt, and it conflicts with her. It very much creates an existential crisis because she is grounded in the purity of and the beauty of nature. And she recognizes the beauty of these living creatures. And just like Adler, there's a shift to a new, more authentic motivation in Peyton's life. So block 1 gives us the kernel of this existential crisis. And it's very important, and we're getting toward the end of the book here. We're getting toward conclusion. Before we get to conclusion, before we get to a very pivotal chapter 15, we have to pass through the existential crisis of chapter 14. This is a crisis chapter. It's existential crisis, and it's all about motivational base. What will define our life? Are we defined? Well, today in Life Group, we discussed Galatians chapter 6, and Paul wrote, are you defined by life in the flesh? Or are you defined by life in the spirit? And to me, that kind of lines up perfectly with this lesson in chapter 14 in Reine's book, because what's your motivation? What's Peyton's motivation? Is it the old self, the artificial environment, the life of the flesh? And we see that no, it isn't. She's thrown into existential crisis. She's thrown into existential conflict. And she is on a journey to create a new last start. Peyton Chase is the eschatological self. This whole novel is about the eschatological self, and it's very much grounded in what? Christian faith, Father Gabriel enters at critical points throughout the entire novel. And so we see here that Block 1 gives us a very critical crisis. Does she want to live the old life, the artificial environment? Does that define who she is? No, it does not. She is now defined by something more real, something more substantial, something much more spiritual. Remember, she agreed to offer charity to Father Gabriel, take care of the grandkids. So there's already been a transition in her life to loving others, toward compassion and charity. And that's what this new self is all about. It's about compassion and charity toward others, and writing a new eschatological life, writing a new last start. And even though the old self tries to emerge, she negates that old self and questions all of her motivations, questions her very motivational base. Let's move on to Block 2, the necessary step of existential crisis and questioning, the hope for intimacy. Peyton desires a more intimate conversation with Adler, and she is internally in conflict over the tension between this economic hunt versus the request for the art show, which would be what? It'd be about her own true story, her true existential story. The step of faith always will encounter this type of new questioning. And Adler makes a very important comment, and I love that this has been inserted into the novel by the author. Adler says out loud, he's talking about his business, his security business, but it's really about Peyton, okay? We know what this is. This is an existential statement about Peyton. It's not about Adler's business, but he says it is important to know what's worth protecting and what's not. What is worth protecting in our lives? What spiritual, essential core to our life is worth protecting and growing and developing and reframing? What substantially true self is important, and what artificial reality is not worth preserving? So this statement by Adler is it's a statement about Peyton. It's not a statement about Adler's security business. No, it's there as a statement about his security business, but as a reader, we're supposed to realize this is a statement about Peyton. This is about existential crisis. This is about a key existential moment. It is important to know what's worth protecting and what is not. That is really for every reader to internalize. Every day, don't we ask ourselves those same questions? What matters today in my life? What should I strive toward protecting and enhancing? And what should I separate myself from? What narrow path should I follow? And what wide path of destruction should I avoid? All right, Block 2, Note 2. Intimate relationship must be more than finite relationships. Little William Kelsey shows up, the 5-year-old, and Peyton embraces him with great affection because family intimacy, it is a natural desire of Peyton's. She would love to be a mom. She would love to be a mom. She has that maternal instinct, and she really does embrace the little 5-year-old with great affection. But that's not the answer, okay? That is a genuine desire. She desires that kind of a family relationship, but it's not going to answer everything. But it is an actual, authentic desire. Peyton also affectionately approaches Adler, but he balks at her approach and declares, "You're dealing with too many changes right now." And so he kind of balks and pushes her away temporarily. But again, personal intimacy is also a natural desire of Peyton. I mean, we understand this. She desires personal intimacy. She desires a child of her own, a family. Those are very natural desires, and we can certainly understand those desires, but they aren't going to answer everything. They are finite aspects of reality that are genuine, but at the same time, we got to remember they are finite, and they speak to a deeper questioning. They speak to a deeper, more spiritual, more centered intimacy that she really needs. So they end up being clearly understood as, yes, very natural desires, but they are finite. And what Peyton really needs, she needs to come out of existential crisis with a divine relational intimacy that will be an answer to her life. So those are genuine desires, but just remember, those are on the level of the finite, not on the level of the eternal. They are on the level of the finite. So we go to block, so they're signs. They are really signs that point toward something greater that she needs when she comes out of this existential crisis. Now, block 3, the summary triad for this chapter, affirmation. Out of this existential crisis, Peyton learns she needs to preserve that which is truly worth preserving. Existential crisis evolves when taking any true step of faith. She has encountered existential crisis in block 1. That triad of block 1 defines the existential crisis. You've got the emerging old self, the negation of the old self, and the affirmation of a new self arising out of an existential crisis. Synthesis, anticipation, evolves of a divinely satisfying eternal intimacy which is on the horizon. It's on the horizon. Remember that ride she took to the height of the mesa, where she dismounted the horse and took photographs for future paintings of her story. Remember the last lesson. Because the last lesson has to be tied together with this lesson of existential crisis. She was anticipating future story, authentic, true story, her story, in the last chapter, and now she comes up against existential crisis. Motivation is thrown into question. Is my life really about this artificial environment? Is this really who I am? And she concludes, no, it is not. This has become a very small part of my life now, an occasional, very small part of my life. This is not who I am as an essential, as an eschatological self. She's in the process of writing her last start. She is the eschatological human being. She is living an eschatological life of faith. And that is new to her. This is new ground. And so it doesn't come without existential struggle. It doesn't come without existential crisis. It doesn't come without some conflict with Ashton, without some conflict with Adler. But she's going to work through these conflicts and be true to herself, as we all should, and preserve that which is worth preserving, protecting that which is worth protecting. That line from Adler was not about his security business. It was about a security business. But for the reader, we know it's about Peyton. That line is an existential highlight in this chapter. It is important to know what's worth protecting and what's not. And that crisis is being felt internally by Peyton. She is dominated by this crisis. She has stepped out of herself in loving others and offering charity toward the church need. Father Gabriel requested some help from her, and Peyton and Laylee both offer charity. Then they come out of that charity, they internalize what that now means, and then we end up here. And what happens? All motivations, old motivations, are thrown into questions. Old motivations are not essential anymore. They are partial. They are an artificial environment that is a small and occasional part of her life. That's the way she put it. The artificial environment no longer is essential. Peyton is a new self. In fact, throughout the whole novel, we know that Peyton is the eschatological self of every man and every woman. This book is for men and women. Peyton is the eschatological self for all men and all women. Everyone. She is the eschatological self. We all go through these struggles. We all have to question our motivations. We all have to choose either the narrow path to life, eternal, or the wide path of destruction, of artificiality and destruction. And in this chapter, Peyton says, no. She negates the artificial environment. She affirms a new eschatological life. And the line from Adler is a line about Peyton. It is important to know what's worth protecting and what's not. This is a very powerful chapter. I'm very impressed with this chapter. And by the way, this book, which will eventually someday sell 1 million copies, for you filmmakers out there, purchase the film rights to this book early. Get the film rights now while you can have them for a very reasonable price, because after it sells 1 million copies, that price for the film rights is going to go up. And I would like to see someone with a heart for Ingmar Bergman to do the film. My choice would be Woody Allen. Woody Allen loves and appreciates Ingmar Bergman, and my choice for making this novel into a film would be Woody Allen, a serious Woody Allen film. Now, I know we don't do black and white anymore, but I would even love to see it in black and white. At the most, maybe sepia tone, because Bergman did some sepia tone. And if I were producing this film, what I would do, I would use as my guide Bergman's Wild Strawberries. I would open with Peyton Chase sitting at her father's desk and thinking out loud so the audience can hear it, but doing some introspection while she sits at her father's desk. And then she gets up, she walks to the terrace, and when she gets to the terrace, the film switches to infrared, and then we enter a dream scene which brings all existential truth into focus about what this novel and film is going to be about. But that's how I would open it. I would open it exactly in the same way that Wild Strawberries opened. My favorite film of Bergman's is still Wild Strawberries. Yes, Through a Glass Darkly is tremendous. Cries and Whispers is tremendous. Virgin Spring is tremendous. But my favorite is still, and it will remain, Wild Strawberries. I just love the character Isak Borg. And I don't know, maybe it's because of where I'm at in my life right now, but I just love the film Wild Strawberries. But this, there's a lot of access to the observer into the thought process of Isak Borg. And in this novel, we get access to the thought process of Peyton throughout the novel. And I love that. It's a very powerful, as literary existential work, it is very, very powerful. That's going to wrap up chapter 14. Samar Reine has given us a wonderful chapter on existential crisis. And I'll catch up with you next time on chapter 15.